Hello plant people, it's Nora the Leca Queen. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we are going to be putting a Hoya Crimson Princess on a moss pole. I am going to be putting a Hoya on a moss pole because I love moss poles so much. I love Hoya so much, and Hoyas have area roots, and I'm just dying to find out what's going to happen when I put a Hoya on a moss pole. Are the area roots going to grow bigger? Are the leaves going to grow bigger? I have no idea. Watch this video and find out how I do it. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I make a special moss pole for my Hoya. So this is not the kind of moss pole I've been making in my other videos. This is a different kind of moss pole that I'm making especially for my Hoya. I am also going to put two of my Hoyas into one pot and make a master Hoya pot, and I'll show you a way in which you can get your moss pole to stand up steady and not go anywhere while it's living in Leca in your moss pole. So keep watching. The first thing that we're going to do is make the moss pole for my Hoya. So to make this moss pole, I'm going to need a piece of chicken wire or wire mesh. This mesh is coated with plastic so it does not rust during use. I'm also going to need a 900 centimeter metal rod. This metal rod is covered with a plastic so it doesn't get into contact with the nutrient solution or any moisture, so there's no risk of rust. I'm also going to need some sphagnum moss. This is sphagnum moss that is moist. And I'm also going to need some cable ties. You know how I love cable ties. So I've got some pretty long ones, and I'm going to use these when I'm potting up the plant. And I've got some short ones to actually make up the moss pole. So let's get to it. So I've got my wire mesh here and I've got my metal rod. So the first thing I need to do is establish how much of this metal rod will be living in my pot. So I grab my pot and I put the metal rod through, and this amount of rod will be in the pot. So I just put a cable tie there so I know where that marker is. That's my cable tie with its marker. Just make a little cylindrical shape there, and I will start to pack that with sphagnum moss. So making sure that the moss is damp and not wet. So as you can see, I'm just squeezing off some of that excess liquid. And I'll pack my moss. So we're very, very lightly packing that moss pole. We're not packing the moss tightly in there at all. So I'm not putting too much. So I'll take some of that out. This is not the full amount of moss that I'm going to need for this moss pole. As you can see, I'm taking some of it out, because what I am going to do this time is actually put this metal rod inside the moss pole. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want my moss pole to actually sit in the middle of the pot and not towards the edge. And that's why I'm doing that, because I want this pole to be very, very steady. So I will now cover this with moss so that my metal rod is completely embedded within the moss pole. So as you can see, this is where my cable tie is. So that's where I'm going to stop. And this is the amount of moss I've got in there. So that covers up completely my metal rod. And I'll just push that down a little bit. And I will now start to close the moss pole and affix that with my cable ties. So sometimes on some places I'll find that there's a bit too much moss. So I'll just pull that out, just to make it all nice and even. And I will start to close that off. I like to start from the top and go down to the bottom to make sure it's nice and even. that's my moss pole all done. I'm now going to cut off these bits of redundant cable tie that are hanging out. So once again, I start from the top, going down to the bottom. That's it. That is all done. What I do want to do though is, you can see these heads of the cable ties that are jutting out here. What I'm going to do is flick them around so that they're lying inside the moss pole, inside the moss, and they're not jutting out. So as you can see, that's now a nice flat surface, whereas this one hasn't been tucked in, so I can't move my hand freely. So when I turn this around, that goes in there, and so when I twist my plant around, the plant is not going to get damaged by the sharp edges of the heads of the cable tie. So I'll do that throughout the pole and make sure those are really, really in there. Can be a bit tricky to get them to turn around, but they do turn around. So just persist with that. Trust me, it's well worth doing. So phase 1 is complete, and I now have a beautiful little round moss pole that my Hoya will live in. So it's quite long, and this is the bit of the moss pole that is going to live within the grower's pot with the plant. So I quite like it. It's very, very pretty. So you can't see that metal rod at all. And like I said, I want this pole to be really steady. So I've actually placed it down on my kitchen bench top, and it stands all by itself, which is exactly what I was going for. So that's going to work really, really well with my Hoya. But I know you're probably thinking, but Nora, you've always said don't put the metal rod inside the moss. This is a little bit different. I don't foresee that I'm going to have to chop my Hoya, and I don't think that I'm going to have the area roots entangled in the moss so that it's actually interacting with the metal rod and I have difficulty chopping it up. I don't anticipate chopping it up, which is why I'm doing this. I think aesthetically it will look so much better because the Hoya will be going all around. So for the sake of aesthetics and for the sake of stability, I have made this moss pole to look like this. I've got my Hoya Crimson Princesses here, and the reason I've got two is this is the one I had first and it started to revert. So it had a whole section of leaves that were not looking variegated. So they weren't white and green and red, they just became completely green, and I didn't like that at all. So I chopped up that bit and hoped that this plant would go back to being variegated, which thankfully it did. But in the meantime, I got a bit impatient and I went and got myself another one. So this is another Crimson Princess. But what's really, really funny is that this one has also developed a reverted vine. So all the leaves on this particular vine are completely green, which is not the look that I'm going for at all in a variegated Hoya. So what I am going to do is chop this up and I'll propagate it, and I will put these two plants together, put them on my moss pole and pot them up. I'm going to take the plants out of their pots, just giving it a gentle squeeze. So this is my Crimson Princess, and that's looking okay. Those are its roots. That's really looking good. I have no concerns for this plant whatsoever. So I'll just put that over here. I'll get my next plant and take the plant out of the pot. This plant has got two growth points. So there's this portion of the plant over here, and that's all variegated. And then there's this portion of the plant that's completely green. So this is the bit of the plant that I am going to cut off. So I'll cut that off over here where it's completely green. So I've got my knife that I sterilized earlier, and I'm going to use that to cut it. So of course, being very careful because this is a knife. And that's it. That is the green non-variegated portion. I now grab my moss pole, and what I'm going to do is pinch together the mesh at the ends where it meets the sphagnum moss, and that's just to make sure that that moss is not falling out of that side of the pole. I will leave this standing bit open to ensure that it's able to actually stand up well in my pot, just to ensure stability. I will now attach the plants to my moss pole using Velcro plant tie just to help position it. So, like I always do, making sure that the roots of the plants are away from the sphagnum moss. I'll grab my other one, and doing it really, really gently, just trying to make sure that I'm not damaging any of the leaves. That's my plants attached to my moss pole. I will also put some Leca in that space there. It is a bit difficult to do that actually because the Leca does tend to fall out. So as much as can actually stay in there, probably need to have a few goes because it just keeps dropping out. As you can see, the smaller pieces of Leca keep dropping out. Now grab my grower's pot, and if you haven't seen how I make these grower's pots, just click on the link above and that'll take you straight to it. And I then put that inside there, and I'm trying to put the moss pole as much as I can in the middle of the pot. So I'll stand that up and fill the pot with Leca. I'm not holding on to the moss pole anymore, and that actually stands on its own. But I do want to do something a little bit different with this particular plant this time. I want to attach this moss pole to the pot. I have made some holes while I've been making this pot. So I've got 2 additional holes that I've put in the pot there and on the other side as well. And I am going to use a very long cable tie like this one. Put that in through there. Attach that to the moss pole and put that out through that hole there. So this ensures that my moss pole is attached there, and I'll do the same on the other side. So that's my cable tie going in on the other side there. I just need to move this plant out of the way, and I can now attach that moss pole there. So I just firm that up, and that's what that looks like. So I've got the moss pole completely tied to the pot, and that is just not going anywhere. It's just some added insurance just to make sure that, you know, my moss pole never falls down. And if it does, the whole plant's going down with it. So I'm just gonna fill up this pot and make sure that there's Leca everywhere. So that's my plant there. It's filled with Leca, and you can see some of the roots there, and my moss pole is looking absolutely beautiful. So I'll just cut off these bits of cable tie. Just get rid of them. And my plant now looks amazing. My plant is now living on a moss pole. My vines are going everywhere. I need to pin those down. It's a bit difficult to use Velcro plant tie with a Hoya because those leaves are pretty tiny. They grow close together and it's very easy to damage the leaves. So I've got something a little bit different in my arsenal today. I've got these little fellas. So this is called a greening pin or a floristry pin, or I don't know what you would call it. But these are little specialist pins that florists use. If you look at the tip there, I'm not sure if you can see it, it's actually beveled and it's really easy to push into the moss. And I'll be using those to actually pin my plant to the moss pole. And if you're really enjoying this video, if you're finding value from it, please don't forget to like and subscribe because it really helps my channel. Let us pin up that plant. I will start with this vine over here. So I'll just put my pin and put that over there, and that stays. Then I'm going to start turning it around. So I've turned this vine around and I'm going to clip it here, right, and then I will keep turning so that my plant is going around. There. I like that. And then I'll turn this one the other way around. Right, so instead of going clockwise, I'll take this one anti-clockwise. So I'll pin that there. I think I probably need more pins. Pin that there. So I've got my plant here now. This is my Crimson Princess and it is all around this moss pole. This moss pole is as steady as, not falling out of there. I really love these little things that actually attach the pole to the pot. I don't anticipate that I'm going to have to be taking this plant out of this pot too many times, and that's why I've been okay doing this. But otherwise, this is it. I'm quite happy with this. It's looking good. I'll put this in my reservoir, and in that reservoir will be my growth technology, foliage focus and root zone, and I will just watch it grow, 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 grow. So I'm really happy. Thank you so much for staying with me. This is the first Hoya that I've ever put up on a moss pole, and I'm really excited to see what's going to happen with it. As you can see, this vine over here is kind of going that way. I don't want to force it too much because if I do, the stem is quite woody, it might snap. So I'll wait for it to grow out a bit more and then I'll gently start getting it onto the moss pole like the other vines. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video.